Marisa Jacobs joins me now. She's director at Xpatweb and also serving on the NEDLAC representing business. Good evening to you, Marisa, and thank you so much for your time. Much appreciated.
Good evening, Aubrey.
Let's talk generally about the global emigration conversation in the world. We saw last week the violence in France and, of course, the burning of various infrastructure and so forth, and all of the issues that are connected here. In the same time, here in South Africa, we heard from the High Court that the application by the Department of Home Affairs for the ending of the ZEP regime had been set aside, and that had us talking. We've got the German government inviting South African nurses to the tune of 500,000 nurses, if I'm correct, to come and join the labor force there. That's something. And I'm seeing many other European countries, England, Western countries, Canada, inviting people from the African continent to come and take up a number of positions. Belarus is making a call. Even Russia is calling people to move. So it appears that immigration will continue to be a conversation that we, as people on the globe, are going to be discussing for as long as we exist.
I couldn't agree more. I think the moving of talent has been topical for many decades and will continue to be topical. I think countries struggle with skill shortages, and where you struggle to produce more skills short term, your solution lies with importing those skills, and highly skilled professionals will become more and more in demand. And the opportunities will become wider and wider in terms of where in the country they can go to disperse those skills. And I don't see any changing of that in the short term. In fact, as you've just mentioned now, there is just an absolute ramping up of it in the short term, never mind talking about medium and long term. It's talent is attractive.
And I suppose the challenge for governments around the world is the regulation of that movement of peoples, of talents from various economies and so forth. That's the big challenge, isn't it?
That's the big challenge, and that is the Department of Home Affairs versus Department of Employment and Labour discussion. How does Home Affairs enable skills to come into the country while Department of Employment and Labour protect local jobs? And then this third element, which you've now quite well pointed out, while promoting and enabling South African talent to be able to go and gain experience abroad. So there's this constant push and pull factors between talent in and out.
Just yesterday, we had a conversation about some violence that occurred in Mpumalanga province, in an area called Waterval Boven, where 5 trucks were set alight. The details aren't yet clear at the moment, but it appears that it's an ongoing issue where South African truck drivers are angry at South African truck operators who are employing foreign nationals as drivers. And it's a long-standing conversation in this country, which seems not to be resolved. Perhaps that's a good place for us to start around what are the laws that govern the bringing in of certain levels of skills into South Africa versus the idea that there are certain skills that are unused or unemployed in South Africa. Help us understand that in broad terms, please, Marisa.
So, broadly, anyone who is not a South African citizen or permanent resident in South Africa, and anywhere in the world, in fact, needs to have specific authorization to conduct work in that country. So in South Africa, you would need to have a work permit. And there's very limited categories of work permit. And in order to apply in a certain work permit category, you would need to qualify in that category. So in South Africa, you would either be working for a multinational, and coming in on an intra-company transfer visa, which means that you are being seconded to South Africa for a limited period and tied to you transferring some skills to a South African. You've got a unique skill and you'll be training and upskilling someone. Or you are an individual who has a critical skill. So you work in one of the occupations that are listed on the critical skills list. There's currently 101 occupations on that list, excluding the medical profession. So you have to have one of those skills, and that needs to be proven by your qualifications through an NQF level, as well as professional body membership and experience with your CV and reference letters. Then you can get a critical skills visa. And then lastly, if you don't fit into one of those two categories, you'd need to apply for general work visa, which means your employer first needs to test the local labour market and prove to the Department of Home Affairs that they were unable to find a local person to fill that position. So the threshold is very high for employers to be able to bring foreign talent into the country and secure a work visa to allow them to
What does
work
that mean? Explain that to me very quickly, Marisa, that the threshold is very high.
So like I've explained now, that there's only those three categories.
Right.
The fourth category would be if you're married to a South African, and then you can get work authorization. But otherwise, you have to fit into one of those. You either have to work for a multinational, you have to have an occupation on the critical skills list and meet those minimum criteria of education level, experience, professional body membership, or you have to have tested the labour market and proven to Home Affairs that you've tested it and been unable to find a resource. And only then will the Department of Home Affairs issue an individual with a work visa and allow them to take up employment in South Africa. So that's a long process. I mean, as you can imagine, what I've just discussed there, for some of those categories, it's a 6-month process that an employer and that international talent needs to go through in order to secure that work visa. So it's by no means an easy process. It's by no means any employer who can find a South African to fill that position would absolutely jump at that opportunity first, because it's so difficult to get a work visa in South Africa. And like many other countries abroad, we know we're certainly not unique. But the threshold is high.
Explain to me how this and is this legislation? Is this law?
Correct.
Okay, so like any law, it obviously needs to be policed, because there will be those that would want to take advantage of this law, whether it's people seeking employment or people seeking talent, right? And sometimes it's not so much talent, it's because people are more amiable if they find themselves in desperate situations to take lower wages and all sorts of different things. Is this legislation supposed to be policed by whom?
Well, it's policed by the Department of Home Affairs, and they would have, so first of all, the adjudicating authorities, so the officials who get appointed to adjudicate those visa applications and work through the documentation to make sure that those thresholds are met. There's usually you need to get a police clearance certificate, and there is SAQA has a QR code on it to make sure that it's an authentic certificate submitted. The same with the professional bodies, there's references that can be checked to make sure that the certificates are authentic. And then once someone has been granted a visa, then there is the inspectorate department from the Department of Home Affairs, who are the guys who we often see policing at employers to go in and do an audit to check if everyone on payroll that does not have an ID number has the correct and appropriate documentation to enable them to carry out employment. I think a couple of years ago it was very highly publicized when the inspectorate went into an employer and found employees not to be with the correct documentation. These days it's much more low key and we don't hear about it as often, but it happens on a daily basis where it gets policed and employers get fined or even arrested and expats get deported for not having and declared undesirable often because they are conducting work on the wrong category of permit. So there's definitely some policing happening.
So if I understand you correctly, if an international worker is working outside of these various categories, I think you've pointed out three, including marriage. If they're working outside of those visa regimes or permit regimes, that is a criminal offence?
Absolutely. And there's sections within the Act that deal with how those criminal offences get punished in terms of fines, deportation, and if you are a repeat offender, it's imprisonment without the option of a fine.
And it is a criminal offence for both the employer and the employee, I suppose.
Correct, absolutely. There's a high onus on employers to ensure that everyone within their employee or anyone on their premises has the correct authorization to work, and even more so on larger employers, the threshold on them is even higher to make sure that the employees are lawfully employed. And it's not just in the correct category. Each work visa further has conditions that are stipulated on that work visa. So your conditions on your visa would say that you've been granted a visa to work for X employer in X position. So you cannot move positions or employers without also getting a new visa authorized by the Department of Home Affairs.
What is the effect of employers and employees not following this legislation? And again, Marisa, I understand that there are a number of variables here. It's either the Department of Home Affairs that does or doesn't do its work through the policing of this regime. It's either the employers themselves employing people illegally without the correct visa categories, or workers themselves who take jobs because they are desperate and illegally take up these particular jobs. What is the effect of this system not functioning well? From whatever source, yeah?
I mean, I think that the effect can be massive. I mean, we've seen it now where we see this backlog with the Department of Home Affairs, where the system is not functioning well. By their own admission, they have what they reported earlier this year is over 60,000 backlog in terms of processing visas for international talent who are desperate to get into the country, for employers looking to bring talent in, and they're sitting with a massive backlog. And the effect of that is hugely strenuous on the economy for those employers to be able to bring that talent in and allow them to take up employment, which in turn creates more employment for South Africans. So where the system doesn't function well, the ramifications, and that's just one, is to say there's an impact on the economy, on business, on our ability to move forward as business, to create jobs, So
what we saw yesterday, and we've been seeing it throughout, time over the last 5-10 years, where we are seeing many South African truck drivers resorting to violence, the threatening, the burning of trucks, the threatening of drivers, foreign national drivers. Is that, in your opinion, a result of this situation where people are being employed either outside of the visa categories, which would be an illegal situation, or is it a matter of backlogs? Because my sense is that the 60,000 backlogs are for those categories of visas that people are correctly applying for, if I understand you correctly.
Correct. So the backlog is with the Department of Home Affairs head office. So anyone who's applied for change of conditions or renewal of their visa, that's stuck in the system now for the last 18 months, and just we have not seen processing of those visas. I mean, the violence, I think that there's a lot of uneducated people out who are under the impression that people do not have legal visas when in fact they do. Or where they could be part of the backlog waiting for their visas to be processed. But I mean, I think it's a long-standing problem that we are faced with in South Africa.
But then, of course, we've heard that there are people that have been employed in some of these companies and, quite frankly, been exploited by employers who employ them substandard salaries, knowing that these people don't have the correct visas, that they shouldn't be having those jobs because those aren't critical skills that are supposed to be afforded to South Africans first. We've heard of that situation. And my question is this a result of perhaps the non-policing, non-compliance, non-enforcement of these visa regulations?
I mean, I think there will always be examples of where any department can do better, and this is an example well highlighted now, where we can for sure say that more policing and more monitoring will definitely help with those kinds of issues. But we can equally highlight a number of other cases where the department have been excellent in terms of policing and showing out errors and picking up where there is non-compliance in terms of the Immigration Act. But yes, I think the more hands there are available for policing, the more we can shine a light on those employers who are being naughty.
It appears to me that for this whole system to work, everybody must be compliant.
Absolutely. Everybody must be compliant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's go into the backlogs, because that for me is quite an interesting situation. The backlogs amount to something like 60,000 visa applications for various categories, as you've explained. Tell me about why we have this backlog. I remember the minister talking about this, pointing to issues around the backlogs that happened as a result of COVID, the backlogs as a result of the migration from manual filing systems to electronic filing systems, pointing out that this is not a uniquely South African problem, that it's happening even in some of the more developed countries. But you give us a sense. 60,000 visas that have been applied for. And I imagine that may include people that have applied for the ZEP visa changes that have been on everybody's lips here in South Africa.
Absolutely. It definitely includes ZEP holders and the visas that they've been applying for, the concessions that they've been applying for. I think there was an announcement earlier this month where the minister said they're getting more than 1,000 applications from ZEP holders every day that are being included in this visa backlog now. So the numbers are high. I concur that it is not just South Africa. We see numbers from all around the world that are backlogged and dealing with severe delays in terms of processing their visas. So we are most certainly not alone. It has, however, grown significantly worse in the last 18 months, where we saw a centralised adjudication system that failed, and then the reversing of that system, and now working through that backlog. We know there's been many measures that have been put in place, a backlog eradication project, and a lot of effort being put in by the department to try and clear the backlog. But I do think it's going to be with us for many months still, as the department works through it in terms of clearing it, while at the same time dealing with all the new applications that are received on a daily basis. So it's not like we can put pause on and say, okay, let's catch up and then we deal with new applications. We have daily new applications while working on the backlog, which certainly amplifies the problem.
1,000 applications for the ZEP per day? Is that the number that I heard you stipulate?
That is the number that the minister announced, yes.
And this is obviously after something happened, because I remember the minister himself saying at a certain point in time that at that point, only 8,000 people out of the 187,000 people had applied. Why the sudden change in the number of people that were applying?
I think as the court case, which now of course has since been finalised, but as that court date came closer and closer, and people became more and more nervous, and there's been more and more media around shedding some light on it and busting some of the myths around why people were not applying for the visas. I think so more and more became comfortable with making those applications, and as a result we saw more and more people applying for it, which I think is hugely positive.
But of course, there have been certain logistical, organizational issues that have created a situation where those people couldn't be granted those visas, including people that are applying for other job categories. Do we have a sense of how many out of the 60,000 people that have applied are jobs that fit within those scarce skills, 100 and whatever scarce skills categories that you talked about?
We don't. So we haven't seen those numbers broken down yet. What we did see some feedback from the department on was that I think it's over 60% of those visa applications are for spouses and relatives. So the department has been prioritizing anything in the work visa space, because obviously there's an economic impact and a business impact on that. So they have certainly said that work visa applications are being prioritized, and have said that spousal visas and relatives visas would not be prioritized. So that's where the biggest backlog sits, and I can confirm that in terms of our experience. If I look at our backlog of applications for our clients, most of them certainly sit in the same space.
Give me a sense, Marisa, as to what then of the person who's applied 18 months ago, who still sits in Italy, for example, okay, who has been granted a job by a company in South Africa. The whole process has been above board. All compliance issues have been met. And yet, because of the backlog, that person can't come into the country because they are compliant. They are law-abiding. They know that they should have done certain things. But because of the backlog, let's say a CEO who's going to run a particular company who says, listen, I want to come and take up this job, but I also want my children and my wife to come to South Africa to come and live with me. What does that person do 18 months after application and there is a backlog?
It is an absolute reality at the moment that scenario that you described there, it is not far-fetched. It absolutely happens. It happens every day, and there are businesses and individuals who sit with exactly that huge frustration. And it's desperate for businesses where they go, we really need this person. We cannot function without them. There's a job here. There's a skill here that we cannot fulfill, and we need this person to come in. It's been very difficult to work through that. We have a history of working very closely with the Department of Home Affairs when we need to escalate something like that. But the nature of the backlog just doesn't allow that. if you speak to the senior officials at the Department of Home Affairs, they are equally frustrated. They are inundated with requests. They are stretched to the limit. These are not these are good people trying to do their job, but the system is completely overloaded, and they simply don't get to everything. And they've got very strict protocols now in place in terms of how they deal with the backlog, and you cannot simply say, hey, this guy is the CEO and he's very important and you need to please process his application next. They will come back to you to say simply we can't. We've got protocols in terms of how we need to deal with it, and that person must wait their turn. So from our business perspective, we obviously represent a lot of large multinationals and big corporates who have exactly this frustration, and our approach has certainly been to take a more legal approach on it and take legal steps, and to a certain extent where you might need to get the court involved to say, guys, can the court please intervene to allow us to get an application expedited and to explain from a legal point of view why this is more important and what the harm will be if we do not get a visa issued. And that has worked well for us in terms of being able to shed some light on certain applications where there definitely is a need for urgency.
So if I understand you correctly, Marisa, for compliant individuals,
yes,
for compliant companies who have applied according to the law and have followed each and every prescript of the law, you're saying that once there is non-movement as a result of these backlogs and issues that are beyond even the officials' capability to deal with, you're saying to me that there is some recourse in the general space.
Yes, absolutely. There is recourse, and it's taken us as long to find a path in terms of what that recourse looks like, because you try many avenues and you fail many times. But yes, certainly we've been able to find recourse for our clients in terms of getting visas issued, even with the significant delays. We've taken a legal approach on it, and most certainly the intention is not necessarily to end up going to court, but it does allow us to put some pressure on the system to get an application lifted from the pile and get it looked at, and find some relief for applicants.
I suppose there'll be a lot of people who are in that backlog who would want to get in touch with you to understand what that legal recourse involves. So I'm hoping that you'll be able to give us those contact details. The reason why I'm not asking you to go into that is because there's so many different categories of visa applicants that would want to have that conversation. But I'm hearing you to be saying to me that there is recourse, there is a way. But perhaps as a question on the side, is this recourse with the assistance sometimes of the department?
Oh, absolutely.
So there's no antagonism in this particular situation with the department, if I understand you correctly.
Most definitely not. As I've said, I mean, the department is equally under pressure. It's not that they don't have an understanding for where the urgency is coming from. They completely get it, but their hands are tied to a certain extent, and this and an approach like this allows them to assist and so it's absolutely collaborative and with the Department of Home Affairs assisting thereon.
I want to reiterate that these kinds of recourses are for compliant people who find themselves stuck in an administrative backlog situation. This is what this is about. It's not just for anybody that wants some sort of recourse, even though they may have been declined for administrative reasons in that process. Because I remember you saying that there are very strict protocols that may sometimes render certain people non-compliant in as far as the Department of Home Affairs is concerned?
Absolutely. So, our first step in onboarding a client with an existing application pending who approaches us to say, can you help me, that my application is stuck. The first step would be is please provide us with a full copy of your application pack so that we can in the first instance see whether you have submitted a compliant application that we can take forward to get expedited. It's essential.
I believe that there's a very high rate of rejection of visa applications, right? First of all, and I ask this question because there are a lot of people, for example, Hafiz Idris Hunungu says, "Hi Aubrey, our Home Affairs Minister is taking long to approve documents of people, but is busy arresting people for not having proper documentation." All right, I understand that frustration from Hafiz, who's looking for a visa.
Yes.
But it appears to me that we don't talk enough about the idea of government's prerogative to grant or refuse to give a visa. Talk to me about that, and why is it that we are seeing so many visas being rejected?
Yes, so as I've explained earlier, there's this high threshold, right? So any application requires a set of documents to be submitted. So it's anywhere between 10 and 15 documents, up to 20 documents, I would say, that need to be submitted with each and every visa application. This includes your police clearances, medical reports, CVs, qualifications, etc., etc. So when the department then reviews the documentation that has been submitted, they check it off against a certain criteria based on the category that you've applied on. And if any of your documentation is not in compliance with the category that you've applied for, then there would be the risk that they will reject that application. So instead of you getting your passport back after 8 weeks with a visa endorsed in it, you will get it back with a letter from the department explaining why your visa has not been granted. And any rejection will have a reason. So they will say either you failed to submit a police clearance certificate, or the clearance certificate that you submitted shows that you've got a criminal record, or your occupation is not in the correct category, so you do not qualify for critical skills, whatever that reason might be. Now, the high rejection rate that we're seeing at the moment, unfortunately, not all those reasons for rejection are lawful and well-established reasons for rejecting an application. Usually an application would be rejected, and then you would need to either go, oh, yes, you're correct, I missed the document, or I see now what you mean, I don't qualify in that category. Or you would say, no, you've read my documentation incorrectly, or I don't know how you overlooked that, but of course I submitted it. And then you would have the option to appeal that application. So you would submit a motivation to say, no, I don't agree with your decision, and then put that forward to the department for reconsideration. What we're seeing at the moment is a lot of poor quality rejections. So many applicants are moving forward with appealing the decision because it's such a poor reason for rejection, unlawful reason for rejection, seems not a well-considered approach when reviewing the application and rejecting the application. So it's the highest level of rejections we've ever seen in the last at least 10 years.
Why?
I speculate. But I think it is a result of the backlog. So there's a high volume of applications that the department needs to work through in a very short space of time. So perhaps they are not taking, each adjudicator is not taking the time that they usually would to work through documents and decide on a matter. And then I also think, again, because of the backlog, there's additional resources that have been brought into the Department of Home Affairs to assist with adjudicating. So you don't necessarily sit with a well-experienced team of adjudicators who have been part of the team for a long time, have been adjudicating visas for many years. There's a lot of new blood in the system, and so we are seeing those new adjudicators taking a different approach and adjudicating and rejecting on reasons we've never seen before.
There's been a fear, particularly from those people who feel that they are being targeted for many reasons for rejection of application of visas. That there is a fundamental strategic decision in government to be hostile to foreign nationals. Have you heard of anything of that nature?
No, and it's certainly not my experience in my interactions with the Department of Home Affairs. My experience has been that it really is just a system that is under immense pressure. Good people really trying to do their jobs, but having huge restraint in terms of workload. And resources and what they are able to assist on compared to where they were 18 months, 24 months ago.
I'm under the impression, or I've been reliably informed, that there are new Department of Employment and Labour legislation on foreign employment. Tell me a little bit about that, if you can, please, Marisa.
Yes, so there's an Employment Services Act that has been amendments that have been drafted for the new Employment Services Act. It came out, I think it's about 2 years ago now, was available for commentary, and we are now finally seeing that cycle come to close to its end. Where NEDLAC sessions have now been called to gather the final commentary on the draft legislation. So we're hoping to see some outcome on that soon. What it basically entails is it's legislation by the Department of Employment and Labour, and specifically talking to their authority over the employment of foreign nationals in South Africa. They've always had some inputs, specifically when it came to corporate visa applications as well as general work visa applications. And this act serves to further elaborate in terms of those powers of where the Department of Employment and Labour would be able to influence on which permits get issued to foreign nationals in South Africa. I think probably the most well-known legislation that's been drafted, that's been commented on by business, is the introduction of quotas to different sectors and how that will play out. I think that makes business nervous, that there could be new quotas imposed in terms of how many foreign nationals can be employed in a certain sector. But yes, the draft legislation is out and is being debated in terms of its final terms.
And the issue here is whether or not the Department of Labour or Home Affairs are going to have jurisdiction over those kinds of decisions. Is that the debate?
It is. I mean, they already have jurisdiction, obviously, over the granting of visas, but it's additional regulations in terms of being, I guess, to a certain extent, more restrictive on who gets granted visas and to what number they are allowed to do so, and who can apply for those visas, and in what groups, etc.
But Marisa, then I imagine there is something to be said for those that are suggesting that there seems to be a strategy on clamping down on who comes in and who stays. And I know that this is not a South African only issue, right? But it appears that there is greater consideration than perhaps in the past as to who comes into the South African economy, under which circumstances or not, than before?
I think definitely additional regulations are being put in place to regulate more closely who is granted visas and allowed to take up employment in South Africa. Absolutely.
And would that be the reason why there is a general nervousness, at least that I'm picking up from foreign nationals? Particularly those from the African continent, that there seems to be an agenda to diminish the numbers of foreign African nationals working in South Africa. Is there then some merit to that fear?
I would imagine that it probably comes from many little things that happen over many years that all start adding up. So if we look at the ZDP regime that has been put forward to be ended, and then the court case that assumed after that, the Angola regime that was looked at being ended a couple of years ago. Then you look at this new Employment Services Act that looks to further regulate the employment of foreign nationals. You look at the new critical skills list that was put into place that further reduced the number of occupations that are on the list. So if you put all of that together, and depending on what lens you are wearing, then I can certainly see how there is a view that it's becoming more and more difficult to secure a visa in South Africa.
I'm also attuned to what I'm hearing more and more from various South African government departments. Let's say, for example, the Department of Health, that is saying, listen, there is a strain on the public sector Department of Health generally, as more and more foreign nationals are using, and foreign nationals at the level of the indigent, for example, that are using certain amenities that would have been set aside for indigent South Africans. I'm hearing more and more, for example, from the Department of Health, saying that certain resources, HIV medicine, for example, is being put under strain because we've got a lot of people, for very good reason, crossing borders to get to those amenities. The job market, for example, in the domestic worker space. So there seems to be a competition for that segment of resources, whether they be jobs or government amenities and services. Is that perhaps part of the reason why government seems to be on this path?
It could be. It could be.
As we close, the debate around immigration continues and rages on globally. I listened to British nationals speak about Polish nationals coming in their numbers into Britain, particularly in the medical sector. I hear that the German government is inviting South African nurses to the tune of 500,000 to come to Germany to come and work in that country. What does that mean, for example, for our economy, our medical sector? But what does it mean for the German jobs or nursing jobs in Germany?
I think that there will continue to be a lot of movement of talent. We've seen a couple of bilateral agreements between our South African government and other governments where they are encouraging the movement of South African talent outside of South Africa to promote South Africans as talent to go and work abroad. So it's certainly not something that our South African government is opposing. There's an encouragement for South Africans to be given opportunities to go and work abroad. I think from an economic perspective, we will benefit as does any country when there's talent that moves. It does put a strain on resources, and I do think that it's a challenge for business to recruit internationally because there's so many countries that are recruiting, and a highly talented individuals will probably have the choice of, am I going to take up employment in Australia versus South Africa versus the US, because I've got offers on the table from everywhere because I'm highly seeked, and that then puts a South African employer at a disadvantage where they need to compete with other immigration regimes, and someone might go somewhere else because it's just easier to get a visa in that country. So I think that is definitely something that we need to look at as South Africa, and I know it's something that is on the priority list for government to say, how do we make it easier for business to attract talent and to get visas, like you mentioned, the Trusted Employer Scheme, to enable employers to attract that talent. But I think it's the nature of the mobility of the workforce, and it's something that we're going to have to come to terms with and deal with.
Got a couple of people saying, listen, I heard Marisa say that there are legal ways of dealing with the frustrations that we have with regards to the backlogs. How do we get in touch with Marisa so that we can get assistance? The person writes, I am compliant in every way, says this person. Marisa, how do people get in touch with you?
Perfect. I like those compliant clients. They can absolutely reach out to us. Our website, Xpatweb.com, and you'll find our details on there. They can drop me an email. I'm on Marisa@Xpatweb.com, or they can call our office and leave a message. Happy to be in touch.
Marisa Jacobs, Director at Xpatweb, and also serving on the NEDLEC representing business. Thank you so much for joining us.